All right, it appears that we are live. So welcome everyone. My name is Casey Lett, and today I have with me Ayana Johnson. Ayana, thank you for being here. In an effort to give everyone
it appears that we are live.
I'm getting feedback.
So welcome everyone. My name is.
Can you still see that, Cindy? How about that? I think that now we've got it. All right, we're going to keep going. This is live TV, y'all. So my name is Casey Lett, Senior Vice President of Strategy here at 352. Many of you joining remotely have been a part of our offline community. It makes a lot more sense with the name Off the Record because today we are indeed on the record. Ayana, I would love to just give a brief introduction of you and your role in what we'll be covering today. But before I do that, I want to just let everyone know what is Off the Record and who the heck is 352. So 352, we are an innovation and growth firm. We're headquartered here in Atlanta, Georgia, and usually bringing innovators together on a monthly basis through a community called Off the Record. It's about 600 members or so strong, got education, enterprise, startup, mid-sized companies, and it's where change makers come together to have candid conversations on what it's like to drive change inside of complex organizations. And I don't think there's much more change that all of us can identify with than today's situation with what's going on with the coronavirus, COVID-19. So we had this originally scheduled for this week, but thought that we would pivot the conversation to talk a bit more real time. And over the upcoming weeks, we'll be having similar conversations with other innovators around how they're adapting to the new reality and how they're becoming a center of excellence and a resource for their organizations, for perhaps those more traditional roles who aren't used to living with so much creative problem solving, we'll call it. So thank you so much for being with us today, Ayana. Ayana, you are the Innovation Director at Point A, and I'm sure I won't do it justice, so I'd love to turn the floor over to you and have you introduce Point A, as well as what your role is within the organization.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for this platform. Can't hear?
I said thanks for being here. You're good.
Point A is a membership-driven ecosystem that's really focused on facilitating many through the process of digitizing their supply chain, which is a really tough thing. It's a lot of risk, but there's also a lot of reward there. And so we're really trying to help companies mitigate that risk by working together and facilitating them through a really robust innovation process. At the end, to the end, which they would have an MVP or a pilot or an experiment that also mitigates the risk of some large investment in a digital technology for the purposes of supply chain optimization. And supply chain really touches everything from end to end, from getting your raw material all the way to last mile delivery. So you can imagine that the problems are limitless right now and the solutions are limitless as well. So we'll be busy for quite a while.
Yeah, to say the least. I think that some of the things that I want to make sure we highlight is that innovation a lot of times in organizations, especially large organizations, is seen as necessary, but can feel really risky and really unfamiliar to the core business. And so what I love that you all are doing is saying, hey, first of all, let's create honest conversation around what's happening in different companies. You're also saying that we have a process by which we can remove the risk. Innovation, and you and I were talking about this in some of our pre-call, is that a lot of times innovation is perceived as the glamorous work, but it actually is a ton of discipline that goes into helping a company understand and make calculated decisions by mitigating risk. And so I love that you have an organization that's built around that mission, and also that companies are opting in. I think, maybe you can give a little bit of context into what the membership base looks like and what you all are seeing. Maybe we'll talk pre-coronavirus, and then we can talk about what today's reality looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got like multi-billion-dollar global conglomerates all the way down to 7-person startups, right? So we have a really diverse membership base, which is, I believe, part of the magic of the ecosystem. We've got a lot of companies that are locally headquartered in Atlanta, which is nice because you can get, pre-corona, you can get that face-to-face social innovation kind of interaction, which is critical when multiple parties and companies are working together. That face-to-face, that personal relationship is huge. And so we're actually building our headquarters, which, you know, is going to open sometime, you know, this
2020,
quarter, God willing, God willing, post-corona, where, you know, that's another physical space where our members will be able to interact as well. And I have to say, my favorite part about working for Point A are the members and just how they show up, how they behave. It's just super collaborative. They're so generous with their time and with each other. And it's very surprising, actually. You don't see that very often. I have not seen that in my experience.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about, I mean, supply chain and the companies that are a part of that, these are big bets for them. And I think that, you know, a lot of times the perception would be that this is going to be closed off. It's going to be, this is mine. I have proprietary information. And what I love is that you guys are figuring out what is the shared knowledge, which, you know, the rising tides mentality. That doesn't mean that we don't move into proprietary areas, but that's for the business to then own. And I think that you've done a really nice job of figuring out what are those guardrails of how do we collaborate to drive collective knowledge, without compromising business critical knowledge. And so I don't know if you can share a bit about your process around what that looks like. I'd love just to be able to set the stage again before we go into what it looks like in a post-corona world.
Sorry, that was my dog. He's the only
very cute dog. I wasn't going to call it out, but very cute.
Yeah, so I think that like many open innovation brokerage or third-party technology firms, we try to pull out the essence of a problem, a business problem, a supply chain problem, a customer problem. And that's where we spend a lot of our time. Just like Einstein said, you know, if I had 60 minutes to, you know, solve a problem, I'd spend the first 59 on defining the problem. Well, it's similar to our process as well. And so we have many resources within Point A that support that company that's bringing the problem, helping them define it, helping them get our members to experience it in a holistic way, in a multimedia way, and really allow the other members of the ecosystem to get intimate insights around that problem. So there's a lot of interaction we facilitate that's just focused on, we want to make that problem your best friend, right? Your significant other, right? Like that's how close we want you to get to that problem. And you don't have to share confidential information to do that, honestly. And in fact, it's probably better if you don't use your own business lingo or your own business terms, because you've got folks, like I said, you got a 7-person startup that's been coding. All they've been doing is coding for the past year. And so they don't know what necessarily, you know, your EBITDA or whatever, you know, all your different acronyms, right? Or
super technical, business terms.
Right. They don't need to know all of that. And so that's part of the magic. And it's pretty standard, I think, in open innovation practices, that focusing on the problem, taking out the industry lingo, and making it understandable to people in other industries and other vectors. So that's the beginning of our process.
I love that. I can imagine that your process is, you know, as your members are being exposed to it, as you all within Point A, it's probably becoming pretty useful in everyone's day-to-day life right now, because we've all been introduced with a really critical problem, one that's, I think, pretty universal. That's maybe what's been most, I don't know, surprising or comforting to me, is that we're all in it. It's unique that you all experience something at such a global scale. And so there's been for me, a really beautiful side of empathy that's come out of people, creativity and how they're approaching work. I know that's been something we've been doing. And I think similar to you all, as a services driven organization where you're working with members or customers, also recognizing that they're going through it. So it's been this neat I would say, change that I've seen just in the past few days. I'm curious, when we originally started talking a couple days ago, as this was all unfolding and deciding to move to this format, I was curious if your world was going to come to a pause, because a lot of times innovation isn't the core. And so I think that companies look at it two different ways. It can be, gosh, we have to protect the core. And certainly in supply chain right now, there's probably a bit of that because there's a lot of pressure testing the system. On the other side, it's something where that pressure test may demand more innovation. It may be that we can't slow down because either our business is going to change, the world is changing. So I'm curious of, in you, and I recognize this is your own experience, in what you're going through, but what is it that you're seeing, and what is the overall sentiment coming from organizations? I've just heard a lot of uncertainty and anxiety coming from the innovation communities about what the future of their work looks like right now.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely, innovation's usually a tough profession. Like I said, it's not glamorous. Usually, if you're getting hired into an innovation role, it's amidst a crisis or some kind of struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times innovation professionals might think, or even people aspiring to get into innovation might think it's the glamorous life. It's definitely not. And it's cyclical for sure. There's times where everybody needs an innovation leader. And then there's times where, like you said, there's a focus on the core. I think that's an interesting dynamic for Point A that didn't occur to me until now, is that because we have such a diverse set of members, those cycles are never all rolling together. So someone's always like, hey, I need this innovation right now. Like, I cannot wait. Corona's not even going to stop me. And there's others who are like, this was more like a long-term thing. I think we want to get it perfect. We can wait. And others are saying, you know what, right now our strategies are changing and we'll come back in a year. Give us some time, right? So we always have those cycles. And because we have multiple members, that's okay. Your needs cycling are totally okay. So I'm actually busier than ever. Like, literally, I was going to take a picture of my schedule and send it to my team, but it's booked 9 to 5. Like, what's going on, And I think part of it's because we're remote, so we have to set up meetings to talk with each other. Unless, the millennials are just on the team are just, IMing me all, so we're getting work done that way too.
Yeah, we're bad about that.
No, it's good. It's perfect. It's fine for me. But a lot of the members who have active use cases are still pushing forward, and we're trying to design ways to do that remotely now. So, because I design a lot of the engagements, I'm very busy trying to think of creative alternatives and test them out and do research on different platforms and use.
You're probably deepening your skill set right now. I mean, I know that you've been inside organizations like Georgia Pacific, Procter & Gamble, and Vista. You've been inside of these really established companies, and I'm sure remote is not novel to you all with, distributed teams, but this is really pushing it to a new level. And so to your point, I think that people's calendars, while their day-to-day looks a lot different, I think their calendars are getting more full. And so that focus time, that creative time is probably a little harder to come by, at least here in the beginning, while we all figure out new normals. I'm curious of, looking at your role, as I think about a facilitator, the role of a facilitator is just design an engagement or a conversation that gets the group to where they need to go. And so there's so much that happens in person. That's, seeing that moment where the person leans in, or that look across somebody's face like, Bill, you're crazy. And so without that real time, body language, and how are you looking at creating and crafting conversations, workshops, engagements that still get you to where you need to go? And what does that education look like for some of the participants? Can you expand on what that new world looks like for you?
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, I've been doing a lot of research, and there's several platforms out there. I mean, obviously, we all know about like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Amazon Chime and Google Hangouts for video conferencing. And I think they all have like whiteboard functionality. Sometimes it's tough with bandwidth, for 15 people to be on video, maybe.
Right.
But there's also some interesting tools, primarily out of Europe, because I think, Europe I'll always say this, Europe's ahead of us as far as their innovation, best practices.
Yeah.
And so there's tools like Sharp Cloud and Mural and Yambla that all come out of Europe that are really very cool tools in the sense that it's like almost like a war room concept. So there's a virtual or a digital whiteboard that is designed for many teams globally located to access in their own time, not in real time, but in their own time, and build on ideas or documentation or whatever it is to get their work done on one single whiteboard. And a lot of them have different kind of like custom functionalities,
Sure.
but they work and they're proven. They've been around a while. And so I was just reaching out to some of my colleagues in Europe to say, well, let me know what tools you've heard of because I want to try them out. So I think it's possible, but I do, folks ask me or members have asked me, are there any trade-offs of facilitating a live workshop versus this kind of virtual, maybe it's in real time, maybe it's not, any trade-offs? And I say, absolutely, yes, there are trade-offs. There's pros and cons on each side. It doesn't mean we can't be successful with the virtual route. I think some of the pros of the virtual route are that, we've heard that everyone's smart in different ways. Everyone absorbs data in different ways. In a live workshop, you're really gonna find that the person who, can process more quickly, who's more, has a stronger ideation muscle, they're always going to be, highly participant, and the facilitator has to bring the other folks along, right? But in a virtual world, someone who's, an audio learner or a visual learner potentially is going to be on an even playing field, right? And also, folks with slower processing speeds potentially are going to be better in a virtual world. They're going to be able to add the input at the time that it comes to them. So if it's 6 a.m. in the shower, they can pop out and add their ideas, so there's some benefits on that side as well. And I'm pretty excited to see what else we discover, because obviously constraints breed creativity, and the best inventions and innovations have been created on accident in accidental circumstances. So I think we're going to see a lot of accidental innovation out of this.
I think you're spot on there. And so I just want to make sure I capture those for the group. So can you, Yambla, Mural, Sharp Cloud, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And then
yeah, and Miro, Miro.
Okay, perfect. And we'll send those out to everyone. I think that one of the great things I've seen, whether it's on LinkedIn, through conversations like this, there's just been an abundance of content. And I found something, traditionally it can be overwhelming. There's a lot of noise, but I found that people just sharing really tangibly, here's the, quick and dirty tools that I'm using. Yeah. Here's the best practices, like you reaching out to your colleagues in Europe. I've just found that to be a really, I've really appreciated the community that's emerged from that. And as I look at, I think the innovation community, open innovation specifically, is very familiar with that. There's not this, it has to be built here mentality. There's a lot of humility that I think comes within the open innovation as a function. We don't know it all. We want to identify the problems, to your point, and then leverage whatever the best way to solve that problem is. And so as I think about that, I think that innovation represents a really unique opportunity to become a different resource to the organization in a time like this. And you're seeing lots of groups emerge where people are coming together to solve problems. I saw something today around groups that were coming around the ventilator challenge, and they were, donating their free time and mind share to be able to think through that. And I think that organizations are going to see this rise up of certain people in the company. And I think that as a business leader, I'd like to talk about what you might look to your innovation group to do, because they do generally thrive a bit more in that uncertainty and that gray space. And then on the flip side, I would love to explore a bit of the conversation around how innovators can make themselves available, because sometimes people don't even know what they need to ask for. So you, as somebody who's really well-versed in a lot of the tools, the tactics, the methodologies, frameworks, et cetera, how can you begin to become a resource? So let's talk about the business leader first. And if you're a business leader, you're facing this, your organization is amidst a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty for both individuals, teams, work.
Oh, you're frozen.
for the day-to-day work?
Sorry, cut out a little bit. You froze, but I think I got the question. So
Cool.
for the business leaders, I think, you know, I can't imagine what everyone's going through right now and in their different businesses, and they're in crises, right? And so I would say that typically innovation folks aren't amidst a crisis, right? Like a true business crisis. We're a couple of, you know, degrees removed from that. But what I do think we can bring to a crisis is the continuous understanding that we don't know what's going on. Like innovation leaders they always know, like, I have no idea what's going on. I'm winging this. I'm figuring this out as I go. I'm pivoting, right? That's a, you know, a word invented to say like, we're making this up as we go along, right? And so that sense of calm and humility that I know I'm wrong, right? So I was teaching this class at Morehouse, and the kids were saying like, how do you deal with failure? That's so hard. You know, we don't know how to do that. And I said, well, I already know I'm wrong. So it's not a failure to me when I figure out what I'm wrong about. It's a relief. That's why they call it an aha moment, right? It's like when you're going on a trip and you're packing for your trip, and you know you forgot something, right? You're on your way to the airport, like, man, I know I forgot something. I hope it's not my toothbrush. You know, you get in the plane, it's like, oh, okay, I remember what that was. It's just a wave of relief. And so I think, you know, typically business leaders, especially of successful, well-established businesses, aren't necessarily faced with that glaring, hey, you're wrong. Like, you were so wrong. Like, you did not expect this, and now you have no idea what to do. Versus an innovation leader, that's their everyday, right? And so I think that business leaders can, if they have time, think about relying on the innovation leader to try to facilitate their teams through problem solving sessions. You know, they can actually use that opportunity to build that skill set into their teams if they don't have it already. And a lot of times that's, you know, that person doesn't have to have innovation in their title, but they have to be that person who has probably mentored groups through this process before. They call it a guide or a coach or whatever it is, but that's definitely another way you could leverage your innovation leader in this time.
Yeah, I think that going back to what we talked about, being able to structure conversation and thought. And I think if you're innately someone in an organization, or your role, to your point, isn't as familiar with that glaring, I don't know, that can be a really unsettling time. And I think focus can be hard to come by. It can be, you know, it's distracting. You're trying to be there for your people. You're trying to answer to stakeholders, shareholders, outside customers. And
Yeah.
so I think that I love the idea of this person being able to bring that structure, that constraint that will allow the teams to be creative where they need to be, versus maybe spending mental energy on some of the very expected chaos during this time. And then so I'll flip the page a little bit to the innovation leader. I think that there are instances where there's probably work streams that, to your point, hey, Corona's not going to stop us. We got to keep moving forward because this is mission critical. Or, hey, our business is not being as affected, so let's take advantage of this time to move it forward. So you're going to have some of that where it's business as usual, as much as it can be.
Mm-hmm.
The others, you're going to have, hey, those work streams need to stop because that is forward thinking and we need the time today. So if that's happening to folks in innovation, how might they begin to identify ways that they can be valuable back to the company, maybe beyond the ways that they traditionally work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it comes back to my sentiment that at some point there won't even be a role that has the title innovation in it, right? Like the democratization of innovation is happening. It's everyone's job to think of better, faster, cheaper ways to do what they've already been doing. But there still has to be someone accountable for the frameworks, for getting people through the frameworks. The frameworks don't stand alone. They're not useful if you don't have someone kind of guiding and supporting groups of folks through that process. And so whatever those processes might be in your organization, the best way to coach others through those processes is to get more experience and more diverse experience. I mean, it's the reason why I'm at Point A. You know, I've worked in beauty care, healthcare, home care, packaging, you know, you name it. But I've never been in supply chain. And there's no better opportunity to experience all of these different industries in one place. So I would encourage anyone interested in innovation or currently in an innovation profession to, with urgency, much diverse experience, business, industry, and vertical experience as you can, because that's your level of experience, that's your level of capability, is really how many problems have you run into, right? Like a book is not going to help you facilitate people through a scary process experiences. So get as much experience as you can. And that experience doesn't have to be with the title innovation in it. I mean, if it does, then you know what you're working with, but it doesn't have to be. You look for experiences where you've got to enter into new categories or new capabilities or new products or new services, anything growth related.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I love that challenge that during a point like this, it may be something tangibly that you're actually going to the organization and saying, hey, coach, put me in, so to speak, of let me come in and help in these areas. I also love, and I've seen this a lot amongst our team, is this is a moment of self-learning. It's similar to you digging into tools. It's how can I immerse in whatever way you learn? It may be webinar, it may be conversations like this, maybe reading books, podcasts. I find that people are really leaning into that, and there's this extreme curiosity, and I can't help but think there's going to be this surge, and I won't even say little, this surge that comes after that of this new way of working. And for me, some of the things that I'm looking forward to, especially in more established traditional companies that struggle with maybe being more nimble or agile by nature, I'm interested to see the impact of this 6 months from now, a year from now, on their way of working. I'm curious of your own experience and what you're seeing. And again, we're early in this process, but are there any thoughts or predictions that you're having around ways of working, around what you're seeing, and what might be some of the lingering effects of this forced creativity, we'll say?
And thinking about that because, I partially feel guilty for some of the positive experiences I've had thus far. So, like not having to commute 2.5 or 3 hours every day, for being able to multitask, working mother of 4, this is her dream, like my son came home from college, but I can't act like I'm happy about that.
I've never been happier than her freshman son being home early from college.
But the level of efficiency that I've been able to achieve by being in an environment where I can think about multiple things at the same time, I can work on things at the time that's right for me, has been really a really interesting benefit that will be tough to give back, honestly. And I think a lot of people will kind of experience similar things, and everyone has mental models and schemas about what they can and can't do. And a lot of times we think we don't have enough. And just a crazy example is that just around the same time that this is all happening, my refrigerator breaks, and I have like a huge refrigerator. It's like 30 cubic feet or something, right? Because I have 4 boys. And I think like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? And we're like, we just figured out how to do it without that refrigerator. And if you would have told me like, no, you've got to downsize, you can have the refrigerator, I'd say that's not enough. Like next time I get a refrigerator, it needs to be custom built, 100 square feet. I don't know, it's never enough. And so the other thing that I'm experiencing is that scarcity mentality that we probably all have, where we need bigger, more. It's like, actually, no, it is enough. You can make it enough. And, just going back to like simpler requirements, for our families and our homes. So I think that some of that will linger as well. And I love, just the simplicity, the minimalism, efficiency. I love that stuff. And I hope that sticks around.
I think you're spot on. There's so much conversation right now around, the basically the allure of busy and how that's really not a badge of honor. And so being able to strip that down and getting back to focus, getting back to, results. And I think that, yes, that's certainly, I think we all can empathize with that at home, whether it's kids or technology, home, et cetera. But I think that's going to permeate to work. I'm curious of, what are some of your tips and tricks on maintaining highly productive work at home? You do have 4 boys. I saw a dog. I think there's a husband around there somewhere. So what does it look like for you to really find focus, whether it's hours of the day, tools, no meeting times, just curious of very tangible things.
Yeah. So, 3 days in, I don't know if I'm the expert yet, but I'll tell you some of my
We're
little
all 3 days
discoveries.
in. So you're the
Yeah.
you're the, what is it, smartest dummy right now.
So I'm joking with my colleagues, my coworkers, saying I'm running a middle school, a high school, and a college at my house. So obviously all the schools have gone to digital learning, and I'm that mom, I'm that innovation mom, right? So I gather the boys and say, okay, come on, let's talk. I want to design a custom digital learning plan for each one of you. And I want to, factor in your personal, preferences. So let me know, like, when do you work best? What time do you work best of the day? Because I'm going to set up that those are your work hours. So each kid get to pick his hours, like, oh, I'm better in the morning. Except for the kid who was like, I could work kind of around midnight. I was like, no, that's not.
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering which one was your rogue one that was said he was just not going to work.
There's one. So we set up, and I said, okay, as long as you're getting your work done in these hours, the rest of your day, even before and after, is free to do the things that you want to do, right? Except for the kid who still needs to revise his midnight hours. And so I kind of go in and peek in and look at each one of them, and they're sitting at their desk getting their work done, like quietly, like they love it. It's great. They love that flexibility. So it's amazing what that independence, that customization, that flexibility does for people. And it was almost like there was like a look of enjoyment on their face for doing their schoolwork. It was weird. And also we've kind of gotten the kind of food that they can just make what they want when they want, which has been good for me, because again, at 9 to 5, if they were going to wait for me to have a break, they wouldn't be able to eat, right? And I know that's harder for younger kids, but I would encourage having kind of the food out, the kind of stuff they want, so they can access it on their own when they're ready to. This is just simple stuff, right? Also,
is what makes the system work. And I think that even the food item, that's been something I've been thinking about for myself. If it's something I have to go actually make and really think through the likelihood of me doing it, grabbing something that's not going to make me feel great, productive, versus having those things that are self-serve. So I think it's small, but it's valuable.
Yeah. And I actually already meal prep. I've been meal prepping for a while. So my meal's already made. I just grab them, heat them up. And literally, I don't have much time except for a couple of minutes to microwave something, right? Because of all the meetings. And then I'd say the other important thing is, if you can, in your home somewhere, still get your physical exercise or whatever you do. That's definitely helped me a lot to keep that routine going. And I tell the kids, okay, from like, this, 4 to 6 or something, mommy's going to be doing a workout, so let folks know when you need your own time, your personal time. And so everybody kind of has a rough schedule, and we're all aware of our schedules. And so 3 days, no fights have broken out yet.
Let us know how Friday goes.
Right.
I think the thing that I have noticed is that you have to be over communicative right now. You have to really lean into that. And, remote does allow a lot of flexibility, a lot of freedom, but it's very similar to us saying innovation is glamorous. No, it's discipline. And that freedom also comes with that discipline. And so I'm finding that, to your point, whether it's hours that you're using to do activity or recharge, whatever that might be, you're having to proactively think through that. So I wonder if people will begin and end their days with a bit more intentionality because of the required communication, which again, I don't think would be a bad thing to linger past this time.
For sure.
I want to be mindful of, I think we have a couple questions coming in from the live stream. So I have my colleague Cindy here. Can you tee those up for us?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Lots of good engagement so far. So thanks for all of you who submitted your questions. The first one is, tell us more about your funding structure. Where does Point A fit in within Georgia Pacific structure? And do you see that as an advantage, or is there a more ideal location to ensure sustainability?
Did you get all that, Ayana?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that's not a Point A employee asking that question. Yeah, I got it.
It actually is point A guy at pointa.com. So
This is the test. Yeah, currently our funding structure is completely membership driven. Obviously, Georgia Pacific has is founded Point A, and so invested a lot more than every other member. But going forward, we are completely funded by our membership fees, and obviously, we're working on a lot of other potential revenue models, but we really are focused in year one to get really amazing use cases under our belt that will speak for themselves and then attract more of the right kind of members for bigger and better use cases. So I would say our long-term revenue model is TBD, but today it's membership fees. And as far as how we sit within GP, there are several parts of infrastructure of GP that we are dependent on, including legal and finance and everything else. Really, we really have none of that infrastructure, and so we're very tied to GP and relying on those resources. And of course, GP is very bought into this vision, which is why we can do that, and it's beneficial for us, absolutely.
I think, yeah, that's interesting. That could be, and I've heard this from several innovation functions that are thinking about what do we build ourselves? What do we rely on the organization for? And legal and finance is often one that has both, it's double-edged sword. I've heard that it can be super advantageous because you do have that enterprise structure behind you. You have the process, you have the points of view, the resources. On the flip side, and I don't know the nature of your work as it pertains to this, but when it comes to engaging and things that are a bit more nimble or don't need the full vetting of your traditional procurement process, is that limiting? And so I'm curious, in working with more of the corporate side of things, are there adapted processes that you guys have specifically for Point A, or is that something that's a work in progress, so to speak?
Yeah, that's definitely a work in progress. And I'd say the processes as well as the resources on those different teams, right? So I think that a lot to do with the person that you work with on those teams as well, right? And so we have a lot of folks who are actually new to Coke and GP that are on our Point A team, right? And so they're learning not only the GP process, but then they're having to think about ways to adapt it for Point A. On the other side, the folks who are supporting us in GP are learning, like, what the heck is Point A, right? And how can we help you adapt these things for your needs? So there's learning going on both sides, and it's what I would call 5 levels of newness, right? There's like new people, new organization, new company, new vision, new capability, right? So all of that is a work in progress right now, but I'd say, it really comes down to the people and having a common vision, which they do. And so I'm confident we're going to figure it out.
Yeah, I think that the benefit that I think happens there is that, one, the membership organizations that you all are engaged with, you're dealing traditionally at a more executive sponsor level. And then similarly within GP and Coke Industries, there's buy-in. And so I think that executive sponsorship and buy-in allows a lot of the newness to be accepted and welcomed versus it being an uphill battle. So I think, some of the takeaways I might have for this person asking the question is that you guys are, it sounds like, heavily reliant on GP as far as the founding member of Point A. It's right now to a benefit while you figure out what it looks like in a future state. You guys are maybe a little shy of 2 years in. And so this is still very much blooming. And then working with different member organizations, it's kind of a living, breathing thing. It's ever evolving. And so it's not something that what we have today is exactly what we're going to have in 18 months from now. So I would say the backing and benefit of a larger entity is probably beneficial, but the limitations are things that you all are actively working through. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. And I'd say the benefit far outweighs the limitations. I mean, we kind of joke around that we're the first startup probably to ever exist that had a line of customers before we figured everything out, and I believe that's largely because of Georgia Pacific.
Absolutely. That brand credibility and just industry recognition, I think, goes a long way. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Cindy, hit us with some more questions.
All right, we have this question coming from a famous Robert Barris. Can you talk about how you guide the Point A member companies who may be newer to innovation methodologies like human-centered design, or provide tips to help others doing the same?
So the question was, can we provide tips to help other companies teach folks who are new to design thinking, human-centered design? Okay. Yeah, I would say, definitely we did a lot of research before attempting to teach our members about design thinking. And I think, there's a sweet spot between analysis paralysis and just do something. And so I would encourage anyone who's starting this out is to just get experimental and start practicing it and start getting the folks that you're trying to teach experiences that help them live through the process. You can only study a process on paper for so long. It's not going to get you there. You got to live through it, right? And you just kind of hold their hand through the process. And every organization's different. I've had to build innovation capabilities several times within various Coke companies. And even amidst Coke companies, the cultures can be unique and different. And so you have to respect those differences of those organizations. Have to learn more about your business that you're trying to help. You have to get to know the people. You have to actually build relationships with the people before you ask them to do scary things, right? So I think a lot of times people get right into the technical aspects and they forget that at the end of the day, you're dealing with human beings, and human beings have a survival instinct, even professionally. And so they're not going to do anything crazy, right? Unless they trust a person. So that's kind of like my simple tips: get to know the people, get to know the organization, and get moving and doing something experientially.
Yeah, I think that's I love the fact that human-centered design is the thing we're trying to teach, but then we forget sometimes that we're teaching it to humans.
Right.
And so I love the aspect of saying, just in the same way we'd ask our customers to do, recognize that they're solving for people, we as innovators have to do that. And I think that what you said is spot on. It's meeting people where they are, whether that's through their own experiences, company culture, incentives around it, team knowledge, all of those things. I mean, you're coming in and the problem to solve is usually a very human problem. Who is this person? Where are they? The facts are probably there, the structure is probably there that any group of people can solve a problem. But if that set of people or that individual, it's realizing their reality. And then on the other side of it, I noticed that a lot of times, especially in our business, and I'm sure with yours as well, working with member organizations where you're building credibility while you're also building a case to do this work, it can be really daunting. And being a service provider, there's usually an innate or a subconscious understanding that you're there to win work or do work with them. And so the authenticity that has to come across there, I think is something that really is nuanced and shouldn't be undervalued. I think that soft skill is pretty massive, and getting people into the doing, because these concepts, I think that we all conceptually understand them, myself included, but when you go through it, it's almost like once you've experienced it, you can't unsee it. But until then, there's this learning curve that I think is, I don't know, it's a challenge. And I think that right now you're going to see people leaning into it maybe a little bit more because of forced circumstance. But I can imagine that that's a barrier that you see a lot in member organizations that are maybe bringing in not your direct point of contact, but they're one step removed.
Yeah, I think the other interesting thing is, the understanding the problem and discovering the solution is 50% of the battle, right? The other 50% is actually getting momentum within that organization to buy in and fund that solution, right? And a lot of that is organizational problem solving, and again, more people, right? More of different types of people, and again, trying to influence them. And this is my first more of like external consultative organization. I was always an internal capability. And even then, you know, momentum is one of the most important things. And so I think that every problem is different and every set of stakeholders is different. And so this process doesn't ever get easier. There's always a challenge. And I think that, you know, whoever is teaching this new group of folks to go through this process might expect that once they teach them one time, they go through, okay, they're believers, I got it. But no, every problem has its own set of hangups and its own set of what I'd call hopes, dreams, and fears, right? And so your job is to pretty quickly, what are the hopes, dreams, and fears of every one of those stakeholders as it pertains to that problem and that solution?
I think that I'm thinking of that really as, you know, you think we talked about innovation coaches or catalysts. You're hearing a lot of that language today. And I think about that in the sense of a very traditional coach, you know, if you're in the sports space. And so you may, whether you are coaching little league or coaching college or coaching professional, you still go in every week with a problem at hand, and you may come out on top or you may lose that time, but you're getting experience that allows you to solve more complex problems, we'll say, and go up in your expertise, but the problem still remains week over week. And so going in with that mindset that there's, you know, you're going to learn, you're going to become more savvy, but that you're never done, I think is a very specific individual that probably can thrive in that versus being able to truly check that off. Yeah, for sure. Cindy, any other questions?
Yes, we do have a couple more.
Great.
So the other question is, do you find you have to contain the scope of your work to focus on supply chain with members who want to solve problems elsewhere? How do you keep people focused on common problems in supply chain?
Okay, so is it that people want to solve their problems elsewhere?
So how do you, as focused on supply chain, point A, that's your lens. And so member organizations that come in and potentially have problems that begin to bleed outside of supply chain, how do you keep them focused, or do you actually go beyond just that for your member organizations?
Yeah, I think the whole industry of supply chain, I'm learning, is much broader than any of us probably ever thought in our minds or defined formally. So we haven't really had that problem. And if we have, maybe we said, okay, yeah, that's part of supply chain too. Like I said, right now we want to get the best use cases. But really, when you think about it, if you're dealing with a goods or services company, everything they do can be connected to supply chain. I think the other formula piece of the recipe that we look for in problems is that there's some digital aspect, right? So we're not doing singularly digital focused use cases. There's always a you know, people aspect or a physical aspect or mechanical or operational aspect as well. But we have not run into the problem of someone just bringing some kind of problem that's just completely not related to supply chain yet.
So but we'll say that given your member companies, the what generally is staying within supply chain, because any part of their reality that they might bring probably is affecting the output of supply chain or the outcome. The how, it sounds like, can vary project to project, whether it's leaning more into digital or human or process driven documentation. There could be a million of options there. So the how and the who probably varies quite a bit of who, you know, who you're solving it for, but the what, you have a broad enough umbrella that, and your member organizations are focused. It's not like you're going and working with just any member organization, that it then helps give the constraints for you all to be valuable, we'll say.
Yeah, I'd say also by design, most of we have an operating board and an executive board. And so most of the folks that sit on those boards from our member companies sit within some procurement or supply chain organization, so that those problems are top of mind for them. I think, you know, as we start to expand who we interact with, those organizations, say business leaders, or strategic leaders, then we're probably accessing more diverse problem types.
Yep.
But I think the magic happens when those two people in that organization start to talk together. And so, they escalate the most strategic business problems that have a supply chain aspect.
Makes sense. And so it sounds like you're giving them the lens by which to assess their problems. And then through open innovation, if they have that mindset, they may say, where is the best place to solve this problem? They may have point A as one outlet, but they may have internal capability. They may have, external third parties. They may have partners, whatever that is. So you're trying to incorporate as a part of their open innovation aspect. Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, in many cases, we're an alternative. And at some point, we want the sponsor to be committed to solving the problem for sure. And at some point, we want to know when they are committed to solving it within point A. Obviously, they're not going to blindly commit to that.
Right.
But I think, the benefit we try to really emphasize is that it's a self-sustaining ecosystem. And so things should be frictionless and seamless and therefore faster, right? So when you think about that time, quality, cost triangle,
Yep.
one of those points in the triangle is always going to trump the others. It's different for each project, but when when the time or the speed element is the most important thing, then I think we're leaning in and saying, hey, for these reasons, this self-sustaining ecosystem might be the best way for you to solve this problem.
Yeah, it's that impact to effort mapping. It's the, consultative approach to say where, making sure they're putting a problem out that's going to be successful or directing them to other places. So you're playing a bit more outside of just your facilitation of the work once it's in there, also that upfront consultant to say, hey, let me advise you on the best place to go fish, so to speak.
Yeah, I definitely think we're leaning more into that. And we probably could, explore that even further of, folks sometimes show up and they just want to know what the options are, right? And so, and they want to know even beyond point A, what are the options?
Yep, for sure. Cindy, any other questions? We're about 8 minutes out, so I want to be mindful of everyone that's joined us and let people get back to their hopefully productive work from home days.
Back
Yeah,
to
I
back.
just want to focus on one very timely question. How do you plan to measure the impact of this new world order work from home in results and timelines?
In results
and timelines. So in working in this new way, how are you looking at actually tracking and knowing whether you're being effective?
That's a great question. Well, we have a freshly organized PMO capability within Point A, and they've been working tirelessly on, really functional, useful dashboards for us to kind of track, what's in our pipeline, what's hitting what stage gate, the speed of these different projects hitting different stage gates. And so I think we have a decent baseline. I mean, we're still pretty new, and there's still, only a handful of things that have gone all the way through our funnel, but we've got a very full funnel. And so I think, the next 3 months, we'll be able to detect if there's some blips, if things are moving faster or slower. That'll be really interesting. And we review that dashboard like frequently, probably weekly or bi-weekly. My internet's choppy a little bit. So I think that'll be, the same way we would measure anything with our key metrics. We'll keep an eye on those. And I think also a bit of qualitative. So some of the use cases that I'm working through now, as far as engagements, I know what's happened after a live engagement. I know kind of the best we've done and the worst we've done. And even though that's still a handful of use cases. And so I'm going to be looking at, how quickly have teams been formed, multi-party teams, how quickly have proposals been submitted and accepted, how quickly have we gotten a multi-party agreement. So I'll be qualitatively looking at that as well as a signal that these virtual engagements were successful.
Yeah, I think that it's identifying what to track. So thinking about the outcomes, we're going through very similar exercises. And I think anytime you're working with one step removed of your core business. So for you all working with your members, us a lot of times working with our customers, it's figuring out, coming together, I think at the onset to say, hey, this is, to Cindy's point, a new world order. So in this way, what are the realities that we're both coming to the table with, and how do we want to track success? So if it's, to your point, on the speed at which contracts can get signed, if it's what are some of the indicators that businesses as usual, or that we may need to adjust expectations, figuring out what to track and then tracking it religiously. And I think that those are the things. And I think also recognizing what doesn't need to be tracked, that some of it
Right.
you can spend time and have metrics on, but if it doesn't tell you any business intel, then let's move past it. And some of what we're doing as well is, to your point at the very beginning of the conversation, more frequent check-ins. And so being able to get some of that qualitative feedback. How is everyone feeling? Does this feel like it's productive? Are these the right uses of time? And so introducing, if you're familiar with the agile, sprint way of working, a lot of retros, a lot of focused work, and then outputs. And so we're leaning into a lot of that in our work, just so it's clear expectation, so people can go away. If we don't have 8 hours in a room together, what do we all want to commit to in a set period of time, and then come back together to report on that. And so I think it's focused for one. I think it's knowing what needs to be tracked, forgetting what doesn't. And then also that qualitative layer, I think is super important there, and recognizing that sometimes just being able to report back on that is what people know, what people are looking for. They just want to have a conversation around the progress of it. And it's okay that maybe it's faster or slower, but to not acknowledge it is sometimes where that uncertainty and chaos can start to ensue.
Yeah, it's a good point. Good question. And I think that the other dynamic of that process, that agile sprint process you just described, is that there, like you said, there's a lot of over communication. It's like, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, then I'm going to facilitate it happening, then we're going to talk about what just happened. There's a lot more check-ins, there's a lot more transparency about the whole process, versus I think when you do live engagements, there's a little bit of like opaqueness and magic, that it's like, just wait, just show up, it's going to happen, and so people, it's intentionally meant to make people feel a little bit like off kilter. But in this virtual process, we get a lot less questions about what's going to happen, because it's all laid out. And so there's, in some ways, I think people feel more secure.
For sure. And I think long-term, it'll be interesting to see what the impact of the quality of work is, because to your point, the insecurity sometimes is where beauty can happen, is where you can really drive a breakthrough. And so where people know so much, preventing them from leaning into things that are super familiar, because that may not drive actually different results. And that may just be a necessary part of the world we're in temporarily. Ayana, any closing thoughts? We've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about point A. We've talked about the role of innovators and really those facilitative, team members that structure conversations, structure outcomes, help guide people through it, how they become a really unique resource during these times of uncertainty. And maybe that's a chance for this function to become live beyond just the role that it has today, become a resource for business leaders, as well as people who maybe are interested, use this time as self-learning and experience. We talked about how to keep your fridge stocked in case the coronavirus and you had a family home, and how to manage that. And then more specifically around use cases for your members. I think that we've done a lot before 10 a.m. I don't know if you have anything additional to add.
No, just thanks so much for doing this. It was a lot of fun. And I know you guys are kicking off a whole series of these conversations. So I'll definitely be tuning in and trying to hold that time on my calendar or maybe I'll be multitasking, working out at the same time. Who knows?
You know what? I would love to be there while you're getting it in. I don't know what your at-home workout is. I'm hoping like old school jazzercise, but that doesn't, I don't know. Yeah, to that point, we are going to be doing these. Probably usually our conversations, our in-person meetings are monthly. We're going to be increasing those, especially as people right now, I think, are yearning for a bit of connectivity. It's not just social distancing, it's physical distancing, and that can be a bit isolating. So We will be doing these, looking at once a week, once every other week. The schedule is in flux right now. We'll be talking some around industries and how they're facing it. We're looking at telecom. We're looking at having some people from the public sector being able to come and talk about what that looks like right now. And then also getting into some of the practitioner pieces around how do you actually adapt the doing of this work. And so we welcome any feedback. We'll be sending this video out later today with some recap items, some links to those tools you mentioned, and we invite the conversation to stay going on digitally, on the record temporarily. Awesome. Ayana, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day with your 4 boys, 1 refrigerator, crazy life.
Yes, you too. Thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye.